This is Paul Moon, director of the documentary Samuel Barber, Absolute Beauty, and you're listening to the 5th episode of what has become an occasional podcast series in the film's afterlife. I've called it Capricorn Conversations, to focus on some more American composers and musicians connected with that era of American music, who would have fit right into conversations at that house named Capricorn, where Barber and Menotti lived, famous as a crossroads of 20th century composers. I'm sitting here with composer David Del Tredici in the West Village of Manhattan, and we're also joined by Marc Peloquin, who you can hear playing the last note of Despite and Still in my documentary before the credits roll. But much more importantly, Marc is identified with David's piano works after performing and recording them over many years. Thank you both for having this conversation today. So I'm really going to enjoy hearing you tell stories today about Samuel Barber and other composers you've known. But this program is really about you. And I'd love to start there from the top. So I heard you say something in an interview that sounded a lot like Barber. You said you realized at some point that playing piano was a way of getting out of playing baseball. Barber called it his worrying secret in a letter to his mom, that he wanted to be a composer instead of playing football. Tell me a little bit about that original epiphany.
Well, first I have to say, nice to be here, Paul. But you have to pronounce my last name right, I think.
Okay.
Del Tredici.
Thank you for correcting it, yeah.
Sorry.
For the rest of history, yeah. So here we are talking about the original epiphanies. And, you started on the piano, didn't you?
Yes. Late. Actually, it was about 10 or 11.
Yeah.
When my interest in flower arranging, which was my first passion, wore out, I moved to music. But I wasn't interested in music, but I was interested in not playing baseball. Very interested. And someone said, there's a nun who teaches during recess, and if you don't take lessons, you don't have to play baseball. So I was thrilled and went. And it was love at first sight. Yeah. And I got good so fast that the nun didn't know what to do with me. She had to move me on. So it was given to someone named Bernhard Abramovich, a wonderful pianist, who came from Germany in the war. And so I started commuting from California, from my home in San Antonio to Berkeley, California. And that was a long trip in those days, for a lesson every week.
Yeah.
And that was the beginning.
So there always does seem to be a narrative in the trajectory of a composer's life where they sort of start on an instrument, but then something makes them figure out or realize that they're maybe meant to create and not just perfect the instrument. I'm kind of interested, I think a lot of people are interested increasingly about, I don't want to say the cruelty, but the standards of perfection in a good music conservatory. And I thought I saw mention of, maybe cruelty is the word, but how hard it was to settle into the career of a concert pianist, where the standards are so impossibly high. What is the moment when you decide that it's not going to be playing piano as a performer for the rest of your life, but creating music, and who made that happen for you?
Well, I remember that, I think this was the first, I loved Horowitz's playing. And when I heard one recording, it was so wonderful. I realized I will never play like this. And then after that, I kind of lost interest in that.
Well, Marc, what was your experience learning the piano? I mean, there's almost sort of a roughing up quality to that pedagogy, where you're meant to have a bad experience so that you become good. Is that how you see it, or am I being cynical?
Well, I understand your cynicism. I honestly felt the piano, I know it's a cliche, but the piano picked me. I just could not resist that sound. And the piano, in my childhood, not only challenged me, but kind of saved me in many ways. It was there. It was always something that I needed to work on. It was nourished by. And it gave me a protective shield to deal with being a young, different person, And but I just loved it. I couldn't get enough of it.
Well, I wouldn't presume to think that you don't know how to compose, but you aren't known as a composer now. No. So what is the thing that made you sure that you weren't meant to be a composer, but rather a performer?
I don't know the answer to that because maybe I was, and I was afraid of that or something. I remember when I was teenager or something, someone handed me a poem and asked me to set it to music, and I never did. But I felt like I wanted to, and maybe it's my own insecurity, but it's the process of composition. I think that's why my relationship with David is so significant, is endlessly appealing and interesting, more so than the sort of what you were talking about, the conservatory. I mean, I've been through that, but that gets old after a while. You know, it's the process of composition that's so interesting and informs me, at least, as a performer.
Well, for you, David, then, I can't avoid Darius Milhaud and his admonition that you actually should be a composer. So can you tell me about that encounter?
That was a nice story. There's another avoidance issue. What do you call it? Aspen. My talking is is difficult to hear because I have Parkinson's. It cut me in half. But I got saved my speech to some degree. But it's still kind of weird. Yes, I didn't want to spend all summer. I was staying with a piano teacher who was a wonderful player, Leonard Slatkin. He was just a fabulous player, but as bad a teacher in the sense of he would scream at me, and I had never had anyone scream at me. My old teacher, Bernard Abramovich, was very German, very polite, very loving. And this guy, now! So he gave me Opus 101 of Beethoven, which is a relatively easy piece. I started all summer. So it was miserable. He made music a torture. Music has always been my joy, my release from, if not football, at least some other thing. At least release from my father's. We all had to. I had three brothers, sister, and we always had to carry wood. He would cut it, cords of wood. And for the winter, we do that. So I hated doing that naturally. I didn't want to cut off a finger. So I got to go out of that. I could play the piano. That was a big ticket away from there. But so instead of playing with Leonard Slatkin, I wrote a piece because what did I do so long when I don't have something official to do? So I wrote a piano piece, my Opus 1, I guess. And I played for a friend of mine named Robert Morgan, who became the head chair of the what do you call it? I can't think of the word. Chairman of the music department at Yale. He said, play it for Darius Milhaud. I didn't know enough to be scared. I don't think I knew his name. So I went and played it for him. And he said, my boy, you are a composer. It was such a thrilling, what do you call it, release or encouragement. So I did just that. I went back to my college. I was a junior, but 1 year too young to Seymour Schifrin, who taught it. I said, I want to get into the graduate program. So he heard my piece and he said, okay, you can come on. And that was, it was such a strange, this is a random classroom of people, graduate students. Everyone became famous in some odd way or another. Lamont Young, what's the word? Speaking of lesbians, who's a famous one who died just recently?
Pauline
Oliveros. It went on. Everyone was somebody you've heard of. Mm-hmm. So it's interesting.
Well, you've also hobnobbed with some extremely familiar big names, and actually Mark and I were talking about a week ago about Aaron Copland, and it actually connects with last episode. I conversed with Howard Pollack, who's a biographer, but he really, I get this impression of Aaron Copland as having been sort of a boss man of his era in terms of opening a lot of doors, officially announcing that a composer was great or that sort of thing. And it happened to you. So can you tell me about that?
He was very good to me. It made me a little teary to think of him.
I see. Well, how did you first meet?
How did I meet Aaron? Where did I meet him?
I'll ask you I'll even ask a more admiring question. Have you ever been to that house, that hallowed house? Because of course, this whole thing is called Capricorn Conversations, and I sort of gravitate to the idea that there are these crossroads of culture, And Capricorn, I don't know how it vies in comparison to the Copland house, but it's right up there.
Well,
A lot of people went through that house, didn't they?
Really? So the Copland House?
Yes.
Not so much a bit as Capricorn, because Aaron was quite private.
Oh, okay.
And I went up most weekends for a while, and he liked me to bring people up to meet, and it was fun. So we had a fun time. And that he never really taught me, but I remember that I would play things for him, and he wouldn't say anything. But maybe then an hour later, we were having supper. He'd say, "Why do you have so many G sharps in the left hand?" And I thought he hadn't even listened to it. He'd taken in a lot.
So we have a very generous spirit there, and not competitive, perhaps. He celebrated everybody.
He did. He seemed to be the way he was in public, which was gracious and charming, and was the way I always saw him. I never thought I'd get mad, really. He was really...
You just said gracious, yeah. What a
he was
word.
very gracious, not competitive. And I maybe thought of a common relationship to Sam Barber.
Yeah.
I met Sam twice. Once Aaron took me to Capricorn, and they were having a great time. There were a lot of men there. And I'm sort of Aaron's boy here, I guess. Look the way it looked. So we all had a nice time. And we played, a wonderful thing, we played this game called Dictionary, where the word is thrown out, whose definition nobody knows, and your job is to write a definition of the word that will be believed. And so, and it's so funny because Bernardi was there, and his definitions were always so extreme you couldn't believe them, but they were very loving in another way. And I remember Barber's where he had they were kind of hardcore, like with a dictionary, strange dictionary. Who else was there?
That's so funny because I always think of that person as having a sort of reserved and patrician personality, but it sounds like if he were comfortable, he could let loose, huh?
Yeah, well, and the one who won was Aaron Copland. His really did sound like the dictionary. He had managed to take in what a dictionary sounds like.
Oh, funny.
That's funny.
I mean, it actually, ironically, it brings to mind when we talk about words and letters and that sort of thing. In that brand new Bernstein documentary that we saw, Marc, at Tribeca, letters play a role there, and you see correspondence on screen, kind of very elegantly presented letters back and forth between Aaron Copland and Leonard Bernstein, where you see Aaron Copland sort of winking at Bernstein, but at the same time, in that role, in this overall role of being the grandfather of the composers, or at least of some influence, sort of cautioning Leonard Bernstein, be careful, don't reveal too much. The world's not ready for the truth about you and your life and that sort of thing. There's that game that I think was the distinction between public life and private life.
Yes, and Aaron never seemed to breach that.
Yeah.
That, and a lot of people didn't. It seemed so odd. But it wasn't that long ago, but it was amazingly impossible then to come out in any way.
Yeah.
And he never did.
I'd love to talk about early works, and then we'll keep winding, going back to fellow composers. But Marc, I just want to ask, have you played Soliloquy, which is one of the early piano works?
Yes, I have.
How would you describe that piece compared to David's later works?
Well, I had an interesting experience with that piece because I had played before that a lot of David's more recent works. That's where I started. I started with kind of what he had written, because we met around 2005, 6 in there, and he was starting to write for the piano. So there were some things I knew about those early pieces, but that piece, I had it, I saw it. So then when it came, that day came where I said, well, now it's time to discover this piece. It was pretty amazing because it felt and sounded like David. So it was a wonderful experience to then put my hands on that piece, my hands that had been through this other music, and feeling a real connection in terms of the way it's written for the piano, the way that the voicing and all the texture, the virtuosity, the lyricism that's just aching inside to come out. That's so appealing. And I've had the experience with other composers where I like to look at early works, and some of them it's like another person. They were that person, especially in this generation, very serial or whatever it is, which is great, but does it have a connection to their later music? Sometimes it doesn't. It feels like they became someone else.
So it sounds like even though the narrative on David's trajectory as a composer is that he started atonal in many ways, and yet sort of wound up responding to certain subjects with tonality, it's still irrefutably David in these early works like Soliloquy.
I believe so.
Well, there were different stages. Interesting, I was thinking about that. The piece you had played, we talked about. When that was first played, it was considered very tonal. Because later on, when it was considered very atonal, the same piece, everything. So the times around it had changed, but the piece was the same rock, which would make more sense. But I just followed my nose, as it were. I played, my piano teacher, Bernard Abramovich, had played for this thing called Composers Forum. And when there was a piece he didn't want to play, or it was too hard, he didn't want to learn it, he gave it to me. So one of those pieces was a piece by Robert Helps. And the other pieces. And so when I came to write my piece after Darius Milhaud had appeared in my life, I had done these pieces. So this was in my ear, you might say. I just wrote what was in my ear, or what I had heard. And I think composers do that. I mean, composing is an art of imitation. You have to start somewhere.
Sure.
So it's true of Mozart, everybody. And you start, that's good, maybe you, but you're still that's a timid you, I think. Or some of these composers are like Marc said, just their first music does not seem to sound at all.
I mean, there's a certain humility combined with courage and individuality to composers like yourself who simply, you said you had your ear to it. There was another phrase I heard last week, your ear to the ground. But ear to the ground is a little awkward, but it also suggests that you're going to be a lot influenced by culture, context. In your case, you really obsessed over a few things in your career, and we'll of course talk about one of the biggest ones that you're so well known for, but one of the early ones was James Joyce. You really dove into James Joyce. So one thing I want to know is, what was it about that poetry, and poetry altogether, that affected not only what you chose to compose, but maybe even the notes on the page?
Well, I went from man to man composing. I followed them wherever they went. And the first one was Joyce. And then after I sort of did Joyce, I wrote 3 pieces on him. They got increasingly complex, actually. And then I switched to my next boyfriend was, I guess this was the big one. I went from him to Lewis Carroll. But Lewis Carroll, I kind of started at a distance. And as I got into it, I got closer and closer. More and more the details of Carroll's life. And then stumbled upon his love affair with Alice Pleasant Liddell, or implied love affair. I got very interested in that. That opened a whole other few chapters of the book. Mm-hmm. And I loved it so much that I was running out of stuff. It was going away. I couldn't end it. So I started to set the footnotes of the book and stuff like that. And there's a wonderful book called Martin Gardner. An annotated atlas it is. And in that he gives all of the background for each poem or a song, it might be. So
well, what is this process of trying to put great works, great authors into music? I can't resist wondering if you heard Barber's I Hear an Army, and the way that I guess he presumed that it's a very, how do I say?
I was shocked how his setting was sort of military.
Yeah,
oh my God.
Go ahead. You didn't quite do the same, did you?
No. But
so
his I Hear an Army was early too, I think.
I believe so. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, how do you do it? How, what's the right way to deal with works of text like that?
You just have to surrender to whatever you're feeling, and go with not knowing why you're doing this. It really.
It's interesting. You say you just simply had a relationship with it. It was an infatuation, right?
I don't know why wouldn't get interested in Alice in Wonderland. It doesn't seem. But in my family, it seems to float through. I have four brothers. My second brother down wrote his what do you call it? He got the word to go for me. He got a degree from the University of California, and his topic was the drawings of Alice in Wonderland. This was long before I was interested. So it was sort of in the air. And also when I was 10 years old, I played The White Rabbit.
I see.
I got 2 songs.
So we have these ingredients.
Everyone else got only 1 song.
Yeah.
I was competitive then.
So we have these ingredients of your obsessions, but then there's this additional couple of ingredients that I actually have never tried tinkering with myself, but I'll give Marc a chance to maybe just in the most scientific remind us what is a palindrome. You've played them, haven't you?
He can explain it better.
Oh, he can. Okay, David, what is a palindrome?
MADAM is a palindrome. It goes forward to a point, in the middle it can be anything, and backwards.
I got it. Okay, so we have palindromes, and then we have acrostics. What's an acrostic?
Acrostic song is, the first letter of the line spells out something read down.
Yeah.
So it's a completely visual thing. There's no musical. Well, it could be. It was.
So I've seen that as far back as Johann Sebastian Bach.
Yes.
But it doesn't show up much in music, does it? It's conceptual art in a sense.
Yeah, it's a sight thing. It's very hard to do sight things in music.
So you do that in Alice, among other places.
Yeah, mostly in a piece called Adventures Underground. That's a lot of backwards and forwards, and I just got interested in that. In the rhythm, the rhythm of backwards and forwards interested me a lot. It was so complicated, yet it was simple. All these different little armies of notes would go, and I was very interested. I needed to find ways to keep going when I wrote. Like I wanted to write long pieces. I didn't know that, but I was gearing up to be able to, by learning a way to move over long periods of time. Mm-hmm. And so I learned. So I had things that went backwards and forwards. In a sense, you don't have to invent new music, but you have to do stuff. The music that's there, the little things, the little kernels you had. Mm-hmm. So I did a lot of messing around with the same thing going backwards and forwards.
I see. It's interesting how you chose something that sort of that disciplines the composer, but doesn't boss around the composer. It's just there,
Say that again. I like that.
Well, composers need discipline. They need structure to move forward, as you say. But it sort of doesn't boss you around with anything,
That's a good way to put it.
Egotistical. It's just there.
Yes. And Lewis Carroll had this weird combination of whimsical and exact. He had the mathematical side of his brain and the other little girl side, so to speak. So that's a wonderful. I feel similarly that way. I was good at certain kinds of math.
There's another thing that we don't see in this type of formal music these days, hardly at all, which I'm just kind of amazed at, honestly. We cannot get over the giggle factor. Well, I'm just speaking for maybe the lowest common denominator. Speaking by musicians in a score. And when composers dare to ask musicians to speak during a score, first thing I want to know is, do you have any stories of problems?
People speaking?
Yeah.
In concert?
Yeah.
Yes, that's always a problem.
Is there?
They never want to do it, and then when they do it, they do it timidly.
I mean, there's got to be some people who are game for that sort of stuff and who are sort of eager to do it.
Then they've all taken acting classes. They're all this.
Oh, okay.
They know how to do it. A little bit know.
They had a career change. They were originally going to be actors, and they settled for being a musician.
That would be the best. But you have to. I can't think what it was.
Well, tell me. Let's get personal. I mean, Marc, are there any piano scores you've had to do where you had to also say or speak anything?
There are some, and you have to kind of become sort of like an actor. You can't speak the way you would. You kind of need a little bit of coaching, projecting. We're not used to. We're so I know when I'm playing, I get very interior. I'm in my zone, my world that I want to share, but it's all through my muscles, and all of a sudden it's, you're speaking. But I think it's good for musicians because we are like actors, really.
I mean, David, do you have a certain frustration that this is something that continues to feel awkward in the concert hall?
Well, I love to make them awkward.
Oh, the awkwardness
I
is
love
good.
the players. I think these players, because they do like when I did Final Alice, the final acrostic song, they each player has to chant or say the acrostic. So they say that. But and they're never loud enough.
Yeah.
And they're always doing louder. And they think when they're shouting they're loud, but they're actually like piano from the back in the hall. It's very hard to get that into their minds.
I mean, the irony is that audiences kind of like it. I first time I ever heard it was when I lived in D.C. for a long time, still do. And Leonard Slatkin, of course, great champion of your music, and so he led the National Symphony in one of these pieces. And I think of things like a cinematographer, right? I like to pan my camera around to the back of the room or to the audience, and when I pan around and look, as soon as that starts happening, people they lean in. They're interested.
Oh yeah.
This is unusual. And it's not avant-garde. There's nothing atonal about it. It's very tonal, if you want to call it that. Just to talk.
Yeah, you mean all at once? Different things?
Different things. It's just part of the score.
Who did that first, I wonder? It sounds like Ives might have done it.
Well, I'll tell you, a friend of mine and somebody I made a film with, John Deek, he's done a lot of that, and he even sort of talks about a parallel to Singspiel when he basically has musicians speak. Passion of Scrooge is something we did where they're just a character in a drama, and that could lead, by the way, to Lucy Shelton, who's been somebody who sang a lot of his works and also is so averse in that style of combination of singing and speaking. Tell me about Lucy and working with her.
Just saying about John Deek. Is he doing to Harvard? How do I know? I know that name.
Yeah, no, he was in the New York Philharmonic for a long run playing bass.
That's right. He was the one who played.
And he composed a bass concerto.
John Deek.
And yeah.
Is he dead?
No, he's with us, and he continues to compose. And
he was someone. He was like a light on the Philharmonic stage. He was like one light.
A tall guy, and but a great composer too.
Who appreciated him at first?
Well, actually, a group that I'm affiliated with, the 21st Century Consort, has had a long relationship with him. They're the New Music Ensemble in Washington, D.C.
How old is he now?
Boy, I can't say exactly, but I think he would be in his 70s. I hope he doesn't hit me if that's too old. But no, he still has wild plans.
Well, say hello to him for me.
I will, yeah.
I used to go up to him after concerts and say that was really great.
Yeah, but you found a collaborator, as he did, in Lucy Shelton, who is so averse in this style of combining speaking with singing and so on.
Yes, she did that very naturally and very effectively.
Can you name out some hallmark works that she sang of yours?
Lucy sang, yeah, she sang a lot of the Joyce pieces she sang.
Mm-hmm.
And Syzygy, Iron Army, and so she got that middle period of my.
Okay, well here we are at the middle period, and so I mean it's funny. I saw one of your albums is called March to Tonality. And I guess Alice is pretty much I don't know, is it the starting point or when that was really picking up speed?
The March to Tonality with MTT, because Michael Tilson Thomas commissioned it. I gave the initials.
Yeah.
MTT.
Oh, interesting.
March to Tonality.
It all fits into the sort of acrostic and...
I have acrostic in my blood now.
Okay, got it, yeah. So the Alice books, I think what you focus on is that they were actually, this is something I didn't know, but when I saw an interview where you essentially said that if we assume that the Alice books are sort of pleasant children's books, that what might be deeper than that is that they were sort of satirical, even commenting on a sort of stale Victorian literature at the time, or in any case, dark. There's a darkness to it also. So. What is it? What world were you trying to put us into with the Alice series of compositions?
Good question. Because you always want to recreate your world in the music. Something. I wanted to. I never thought of this before. I wanted to make sense of the atonality of my one side of me, and the music of the times, and my own more weird side, which is fantasy-like and not tonal. So I had to find a text that had done that already.
Oh, interesting. So in other words, you found in one place, this body of work, you found something that was reflecting or resonating with your own puzzlement as to where you were. I mean, when I think of Alice, I just think of like, what's happening now? What's happening now? What's happening now? What's going to happen now? What is that? It's almost frightening. I think as a kid, it's not the easiest literature. It's intriguing, but it's sort of scary.
Yeah, it is. That's nice. That's what you're saying. Atonality is scary.
Yeah.
And
so I guess it's interesting how there's no simplistic good or evil maybe in the Alice, where somebody's going to win, somebody's going to lose.
Everybody loses. It all goes crashing.
But there's no like one, clear villain or anything. It's just sort of, life is kind of mysterious and surprising constantly, isn't it?
It's true. That's a good way of putting it too. It's not. There's no winner.
Yeah. Well, how does that affect your structure? In other words, when you structure a piece, I don't know, composers would tend to think that they have to have rising action, they have to have conflict, they have to have the denouement and climax.
And you need all that too. You need all that.
Do.
I feel.
So you buy that.
I buy that.
Yeah.
And I'm definitely of the climax generation.
Yeah. Well, but no, I wonder about that though. I want to jump to that question. I mean, I've been dying to ask this of any composer these days because it's almost, I suppose I can't. It's maybe cynical too. What do people want these days out of music?
Yeah, I'd like to.
We just came out of like a year and a half of people making sure we all know what they want. Like I've been stuck at home. This is what I like. I like murder dramas. I like whatever. Right? What do people want out of music these days?
It's different. I think it has changed what people want out of music. I don't quite know what it is.
Well, tell me what you think.
I think it's a good opportunity for somebody.
Yeah?
I do.
Well, how do you fit in?
I think it's becoming simplified. People don't like. It's gotten so simple, music. And one thing interesting to me, this group of two friends of mine who recorded a piece, and I heard it the other day. It was a finished recording, and there were like wrong notes in it. I thought, why wouldn't they have edited those out? It seems strange to left them in. So I went and talked to the woman who edited the thing. She said, "Well, it was not a normal recording. It was what's the thing?
A live recording?
What do you do when it's like a Zoom?
Oh, live streaming. Yeah.
So they said we can't edit it very easily.
Yeah, right.
So it just whenever it comes out, it's like starting over again.
Sure.
Mistakes there. That's like a public performance.
Sure.
So it's like, oh my God! So we're back there again.
Yeah.
And then that's been spent another 50 years refining it in a different direction.
I see.
So.
Well, I mean, you said simplified. People, I think there's a quality that ironically overlaps with your later identity, which we're getting to, of a composer as, if you will, activist or someone who is socially involved. What's worrying, I suppose, I shouldn't insert myself here, but I mean, what's worrying is that the idea of liberating music to be accessible and diverse also can have the parallel effect of just the kind of thing you described. Just let it go. Don't worry about it. It's too complicated. We don't have to hit all the right notes. Or, in any case, that world of so-called classical music, the barriers to entry are really high, aren't they?
Yeah, now it looks high.
Yeah.
Really
Well,
high.
yeah, that's interesting. What did you mean by that? Compared to when?
Well, to when I was in school,
Yeah?
I would say there was no other world. I mean, you couldn't perceive it even as that.
Yeah.
It was just...
Because I thought that the barriers to entry were even higher in the old days. And now there's quite a few orchestras in the U.S. I mean, Slatkin has told me about how, we take for granted how few there were, even maybe half a century ago.
Few orchestras?
Orchestras, chamber music ensembles.
That's true.
There's an explosion.
And something like Mahler also was such a late, appreciated so late.
Mm.
He really, when it was all over, he was writing his things as though he'd never heard of fortissimo before.
Yeah.
I think we're getting in line and ready for something. I don't know what.
Yeah.
Music is like classical music scares me. It seems to have lost its significance for so many people.
Yeah, I mean, I guess one of the things that has put my mind here a lot is that I did find myself, just speaking from my experience, during the pandemic, I found myself weirdly not listening to music as much, and maybe more like podcasts or discussions, things like that. And what do we even want from music? Like, what does it give us? Are we actually so advanced now with connections to every website possible in the world? All this stuff in our heads. I wonder if it's like we don't need to be dancing around campfires anymore. Is music like outdated now? I'm being really provocative.
Now you can
here.
buy a pill that'll be like Mahler 7, Beethoven 3rd.
No, but really, is music going to get outdated? I'm being a little provocative.
Well, what has happened in the past? Are things that aren't going out of style
So you've been around a little longer. You've seen this sort of talk before.
Not really. You don't talk about it. What you're saying is provocative.
I'll make it personal. How much do you listen to music?
I was just asked that question, and the answer was 0.
Yeah.
I don't listen to music.
That's interesting. Yeah.
I never.
Tell me why. Well, I guess it could be the difference between your music or other people's music, right?
I just don't listen to music.
Yeah.
I like the social aspect of it with friends, but to sit alone and listen to a piece has to be a very special reason to sit still that long.
Yeah, yeah.
But the podcasting something that changes a little bit. It's an attempt to make music more automatically available, and don't get fussy, don't get stopped by the fussiness of a wrong note. And the tyranny of the wrong note has to go. I think it's going.
Yeah.
The wrong notes are now all right.
And what do you feel? How do you feel about that as a composer? Because you don't want people screwing up your music.
I don't know.
Right?
I spent my life trying to make the notes sound right. It's a shocking thing. I can't believe this would happen.
Well, this could lead into, I mean, a parallel question about do you listen to music, what do you want out of music, is fundamentally something that I think a lot about. What led me to Samuel Barber, honestly, is it an emotional language? Or to put another way, when you had this tonal shift, if you will, were you also opening up to music as a deeply emotional language compared to something more mathematical or academic?
And definitely, I was trying to escape from something, perhaps, and I didn't want to get tangled up in it. I wanted to save myself.
Yeah.
So I wrapped myself in a cocoon of tonality and moved forward.
Is it trivial to say that music expresses emotions? Or is it beside the point?
It does, I think.
Yeah.
Emotions.
Yeah. Marc, any thoughts on this thing and connecting with Samuel Barber too? I mean, you have somebody who was unfashionable in his time, in particular, and who stuck to his guns at a time when audiences, I thought, were shortchanged in some sense with that emotional connection.
Yes, he certainly did stick to his guns, and he had so much craft. You know, like his music is, you know, the piano sonata and songs, everything is so beautifully crafted, and the such original ideas. I call it the old-fashioned values of music, which never die. It can go through different languages or things, but you know when something there's the memorability factor. It gets in. For me personally, if it gets into my bones, then I know that it's real. And I think Barber, I think that's a good point. He stuck to his guns, and it's very authentic music, and it's still being heard, and it stands, you know, the test of time. And his lyrical gift was just, you know, fantastic. And I'm sure it wasn't always easy for him. Maybe he had his cocoon. I don't know enough about it, but I admire the fact that he's stuck to that was his voice, you know.
Well, and same for David. And I just wanted to run through a couple of names and pieces to hear your insights. Since Bernstein, again, is something fresh, since this new film, new attention to him. By the way, the latest in the trades. Bradley Cooper is going to play Leonard Bernstein in a film that's in development right now, and he will also direct the film. So, I mean, there's a guy who has gotten more than his fair share of attention over the years, but he gave you some attention because he recorded Tattoo, and you were composer in residence for a time at the New York Philharmonic.
Leonard Bernstein, yes.
Yeah. Any stories you want to
yes,
tell?
I have one funny story.
Please.
I believe I can tell. There's several I can't tell. Well, maybe I can. But, yes. He was going to do my piece Tattoo with Philharmonic. The night before, he summoned me to his apartment. He said, "David, this is a wonderful piece. I love it. We're going to record it, and it's going to be great. However, there's one spot where I want to make a small cut. I'm sure you won't mind, but it's my personal wish, I think. You know, David," he said, I made the Copland Third Symphony. I made it, the cuts I put in it. And also the 2 or 3 of these classic American rocks. And I said, "No, I appreciate that. You said that. But I think I'll do it the way it is." I'd already heard the piece, wasn't I? He said, "Well, David, you know," and he went on. This was like 8:30. We had dinner, a lovely little dinner, separate trays. And at 3 in the morning, I finally said, "Okay, tomorrow at the rehearsal, you can try it." "Oh, great, it's wonderful." And I was gone. And the next day he played it, and I said, "It's very nice, but I like it the way it is."
Oh, wow.
I don't want it. I said, "Okay, wonderful." It never happened. It never happened again. He recorded it with this little cut in it.
Oh, he did. He did it for the recording.
It became like a how do you call this thing? You weaponize something. The new word. He weaponized that little cut. He had to have his will. It was meant to cut.
Wow. That's an interesting and revealing. I mean, you talk about somebody who really had I don't know, stamina, maybe is the word to put it. 3 a.m., right? And then
he had a lot of stamina.
Yeah, interesting. Oh, gosh. Okay, here's another one. Leonard Slatkin, in Memory of a Summer Day. Maybe not the premiere, but certainly that's the recording that a lot of us have heard. And certainly a champion of your work. Yeah. Comments on working with Leonard Slatkin, and then anything about that piece, too, In Memory of a Summer Day, which won you the Pulitzer.
And he commissioned it. There's a story where the manager of the Chicago Symphony, where they were doing Final Atlas, called Leonard and said, "I want you to come. Something very interesting is happening here." So he came and heard the piece. And came backstage afterwards. I didn't know what it was. He said, "I want one of those." So, and then he called me up later then, or the office did it, and I wrote In Memory of a Summer Day.
This is sort of like it's a beautiful piece, and just like the Adagio for Strings is so beautiful, it has an interesting history, because with the Adagio for Strings, it was originally the second movement of the string quartet,
right.
And then it became this, other
choral
piece. Yeah. It also became a choral piece, but then, of course, the famous incarnation was this string arrangement. Similarly with this piece, though, it started as what? What's the history of this piece? Because it's connected with the Alice, compositions. Well, at least I thought. In Memory of a Summer Day, it shows up in Alice somewhere.
Yeah, one of my favorite pieces.
Is it?
I don't know why, but.
And the when you got the Pulitzer, it was a surprise, wasn't it? It was, in a sense, because of what was normally being celebrated at the time.
Yes, that was a big surprise. Mm-hmm. People said to me, "You should have gotten it for Final Alice," which was the year before. Mm-hmm. But I was very happy to get it for.
Yeah. So in your short, there's a Boozy and Hawks documentary about you, and Leonard Slatkin is, since we're talking about Leonard Slatkin, he's interviewed, and to put it in simple terms, he said that you basically had 3 phases as a composer. There's, we've talked about 2 of them, I guess, but then your social activism, if you will, identity emerged as your third. Although actually that was a few years ago, and then I almost feel like maybe there's a 4th phase where you're really focusing on piano, composing for piano, working with Marc, and that sort of thing. But as to this third one, I'll use one entry point maybe. What were the circumstances when you composed Bully Side? What's the story behind that piece?
Well, Marc had a lot to do with my activism, third side, which was to come out as a gay man musically, find a musical equivalent of being gay in notes. Mm-hmm. And Marc was so enthusiastic about my music, it gave me a kind of a shot in the arm. And I wanted to celebrate that or hang on to that. 'Cause it was so hard to go from Alice in Wonderland to something about jerking off.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Was Bully Side around the beginning of that?
Bully
is that
Side was
a little earlier?
Deep inside it.
I see, okay.
That was not so.
Well, let's, if I may, I mean, I'd love to talk about and hear your thoughts on the absence of both eroticism in general, sensuality in general in music, and then the specific thing you chose to write about. What prevented there from even being a critical mass in this art form of music that even bothered dealing with it? I can't help but think about The Lovers, which was a late Samuel Barber piece, that there's a moment when somebody sings "Strip Off Your Clothes," and then all of a sudden everybody's eyebrows go up, and it's like, oh, you can't do that. But
it's so great. That moment everyone composers live for.
Yeah,
you can't do that.
So there was hardly anything. Actually, what if you wear a musicology hat, was there anything up to you?
Up to me what?
Literally, was there any composer grappling with this stuff?
No one was interested in that. They didn't think of it as I found the rock, whatever it was.
Yeah.
It turned out to be a bit of a pearl. But no, it just was the next thing I wanted to do. It was a huge part of my life at that time, coming out as gay and making it meaningful, and it was part of my life. I just wanted to give it a musical equivalent, and I didn't know if you could, because it also was as a free pass area. No one had done it. Mm-hmm. No one had really written anything incontrovertibly gay or sexual. It just hadn't happened. There were always he, she pronoun mix-ups that were not good enough for me.
That comes later, I think. Well, I would think certainly there were more. The gatekeepers must have been a big factor. For example, programmers simply are going to program works based on whether they like them or not, right? And tastemakers must have been one of the barriers historically.
Well, I had pieces taken off the program unless they removed certain words.
Really?
Certain words that now are not even what?
Yeah.
But it was very controversial.
I see.
I think this concert was in a church.
Sure.
What was the word? I don't know what the word was.
So how did you resolve some of these early things? Were you somewhat pragmatic? Said, fine, as long as it's an incremental step. Yeah. You let some of those things happen, didn't you?
No, I wasn't saying necessarily incremental. I mean, I started with some of them were very in your face.
I see, yeah. And take it or leave it, right?
They commissioned it. Well, everyone wanted to be liberal. I wanted to be liberal about it.
I see.
But even some of them were shocked.
Well, I think that goes.
The publisher wouldn't let me publish the piece. My favorite pianist poems. You cannot use the word penis in music.
I see the poster on the wall there. Yeah. Well, that actually, a lot of composers continue to be interested in the practice of commissions and where that's headed, whether that's sort of continues to be their lifeblood. In the case of commissions, though, is it true, on the other hand, that commissions are sort of a fun trick because it's an upfront commitment, isn't it? So whatever you deliver in response to a commission, they got to take it or leave it, right?
Exactly. That's a nice trap.
So did that happen a few times where they didn't
I took advantage of that.
You did?
Yeah.
Would you say that they didn't know what they were getting into?
How could they?
That's great.
They thought he was doing an Alice composer. They wanted the lovely Alice piece. They got something about soldiers walking over other men in mud fields.
But something that has really interested me is that there was a situation, particularly in Barber's time, all these composers at Capricorn, what they often had in common was that there were these sort of matrons of the arts who commissioned them, subsidized them, but kind of kept their secrets secret. And they were progressive, and they protected them from the world in a sense. But it was the only way that things could get done back then. You actually weren't in the exact same situation. You just went ahead and did it anyway.
It was close. It was the next step.
Yeah, you were, weren't you?
Yeah.
That's interesting.
No one actually wrote in Copland's time. No one wrote explicitly
Yeah.
about sex.
Yeah.
Sex or gay sex.
Right.
The sex does not
It's
exist.
just eroticism in general.
Yeah. Well, no, eroticism, that's already a softer word. There's a lot of eroticism, whatever.
I got
There isn't
it.
a lot of sex.
No.
It's a shorter word. You need more syllables,
Yeah.
I think.
Well, I also another question I couldn't resist asking is, what does the response to your music of this nature say about America? Because you're a quote American composer, and that has a certain cachet to it. I mean, Aaron Copland was a quote American composer, but do other countries have they embraced your music more than American audiences?
No, I don't think so.
Really interesting.
No.
Are they more stuffy about sex in music?
I think they are.
Really, that's interesting. Because I thought they would like to sneer at us and say that we're very uptight here.
I haven't had that many performances
Overseas.
so I don't really know.
Interesting. I mean, I've heard American composers complain of the idea that a lot of Europeans either need us to be making jazz or extreme avant-garde, and there's sort of little room for anything else.
That's interesting. I believe that's probably true.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of a caricature of Americans.
But I never took in jazz. I didn't go towards jazz because it was such a big thing.
Yeah.
I didn't.
Marc, how would you introduce to if we talk about this, so to speak, fourth phase, where now you've really spent a lot of your energy and creative output on piano, adding to the piano literature? How would you introduce Gotham Glory, Marc?
Gotham Glory, it's a big 4-movement piece that was written before I started working with David, so it had already existed, and I guess that was the first big piano piece. We talked about the earlier piece. There's a piece called Virtuoso Alice on the acrostic song that you discussed. But that was one of the first big pieces. And since that piece, there have been other multi-movement works. So I would put it in that category. And also a deeply personal piece. It's there's the West Morning in the West Village has to do with this neighborhood and the tragedy of the Twin Towers, and
Yeah.
that beautiful museum piece, Fugue, very big fugue. That's one of the great fugues.
Yeah, you gave me the CD last week, and I've really been enjoying. I'm a New Yorker, and so the idea of how do you depict this complicated city in music has taken many forms. I mean, but I wasn't getting like the Bernstein to Daniel Poor vibe here of the some sort of dynamic, industrious city. It was a lot more delicate and a lot more perceptive. You said it's a personal piece. So the movements include something on the West Village, and again, the West Village isn't downtown. It's not Midtown. It's not the Upper East Side. It's Upper West Side. It's distinctly the West Village, and here we are sitting in the West Village. What is this a love letter to? That first movement. What does the West Village mean to you? You've been here a while.
Yeah, they have 45 years in the same spot, as it were. What it's become, it was a kind of a wicked place when I came here. And now it's a very nice place. And I remember when we saw our first baby carriage, no one knew what it was.
Well, importantly, I mean, to connect back to the third, phase of, if you will, I mean, these are all existing and simultaneously, but man, I rode my bike here, and I rode past Stonewall, and I mean, that also is, must have been being sort of depicted in the music as well. There's a melancholy quality, I guess, to that movement that seems to be almost like a dirge for the things that you've seen in the West Village, maybe.
Well, the whole experience of being gay is so caught into pain.
Because of the AIDS crisis, perhaps.
Well, AIDS made it, but everyone was hating gays anyway, in a sense. So when AIDS came, they externalized that there's something wrong with being gay. It can be interpreted that way.
Sure.
So that was very hard to triumph over.
The movement about the museum, just also struck me because it really felt like the soundtrack to the right way to experience a museum. It just because it wasn't again this sort of fanfare at all. Because that's not what I feel when I walk through a museum. And then 9/11. Anything you want to say about that movement and your approach to it? Because what a challenge. I mean, Steve Reich has taken it on. John Adams has taken it on. What was your Corigliano has taken it on? What was your approach to grappling with that incident?
I don't know why it came to me just to do something very soft. And
is there a marking pianissimo? That got to be the quietest playing I've ever heard. How do you do that, Marc? There's a pedal involved, I'm sure, or was there not?
Hopefully there is, because I love the pedals. Probably it's David does like extreme dynamics. There's and it's but it has to be written in a way. In that movement, there's some inside the piano. You
strum there's strings,
some like that. So it now that we talk about it, it is very quiet, very intimate for such a dramatic event. And just one thing about that first movement, the West Village movement, I remember when we were recording it, for some reason that day my tempo sped up, which was unusual because I'm usually pretty much, you get kind of you're locked in your tempo. You live in that tempo by the time you're recording. I remember stopping and David was like, it's fast. And I listened to it and it reminds me of what you said, that it's kind of a different take on the West Village, a kind of more personal,
melancholy, perhaps.
Yeah, and I think that psychology to the music is very appealing, draws you in. It can't just be, it's not superficial, you know.
By the way, I can't resist saying that the last movement is pretty long in comparison to the rest. And it's almost tiring. It must have been tiring to play.
Wilman Rink.
And it really goes in circles, you know. Is it a fugue? It's, no, okay, canon.
It was in circles the way a skater goes in circles.
Right, well, also, I mean, I'm just going to confess to you, I was being very visual with this suite of piano pieces. I'm thinking of Trump, sort of like as his prison sentence, like being forced to ice skate
Go on.
for the complete length of the piece. And I'm seeing Marc with a grand piano in the middle of the rink, playing. Very straight, by the way, like very seriously. And I see Trump constantly falling down and getting back up again. I don't know. I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. But similar comedy is like, oh my God, you're hoisted by a crane with the Manhattan skyline on the album cover. Whose idea was this? Because literally, there's a whole grand piano being held by a crane, and then you're right there. You're just kind of like hanging on. I think you're sitting on the piano, aren't you, or something?
You're leaning on it.
Whose idea was this?
It was he's a good friend of mine, the guy who drew it.
Yeah.
Like the idea.
And can you confirm for the record that you were not hanging from a crane?
We won't say.
All right.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, I'm kind of wrapping up with a sort of like a free round, but I certainly wanted to ask any stories or anecdotes you might have about Samuel Barber. You've already mentioned the thing about the games at the house at Capricorn, but what would you, if you could say, what was it like to meet him and what was your impression of him? And then I also love to run through any pieces of Samuel Barber that you have any comments on or that you like.
I always admired Sam Barber. I didn't know him because I knew Copland very well. They lived near each other on the same plateau. Capricorn went into Aaron's house. But we never went there for some reason. And so one time we did for this dictionary game, and that was a lot of fun. But his music I had great respect for, because I didn't think anyone else had a big technique like he did in American music. Just a terrific ability to put feelings and to make expressive devices in music, a canon or a thing like that, or a fugue. He made it very personal and made it romantic in a way that was fresh and surprising. Mm-hmm. Then I met him towards the end of the life. It's not such a nice story. I had lunch with him. Someone else there introduced us. I had just had this big success with Final Alice. It's very hard for another composer to endure the success of another, especially that distance of 1 foot away, as the table is. But we had lunch, and he just spoke about Final Alice, congratulating me on it. But a lot of pain came out of his mouth and eyes, and I could see that it's hard to do that. I didn't know his personal story so much, but now I'm being way beyond his age until I understand now all the regret of leaving a lot of things behind.
Mm-hmm. So he was at that late stage of his life. I mean, we know that he had alcohol problems, but he also eventually, fell to melanoma. So it was truly just a health thing. But there was also the idea that his music was increasingly not fashionable, if you will.
Yeah.
But he kept writing great music right up until the end. But he also lost Menotti, and I think that was a really big loss.
That was a big loss.
And it kind of makes anyone wonder how that can work, 2 composers, right?
Yeah, it's amazing. Unique.
Have you dared try?
Yes, I have.
Yeah. I mean, it can go all way. It can go in all directions, I suppose. But yeah, I always what an interesting kind of showdown to have 2 people try and separate those things. Capricorn was famous for having 2 wings. They chose it because they were just as far away as possible. A very long house.
It's very sensible. But it must have been fun to live with another composer like that.
I guess so. Maybe at first.
2 successful composers.
Yeah.
I don't think they were the type who were jealous of the other, because one who wrote this word libretto for Cleopatra. Didn't Menotti write that for her?
No, actually, in fact, felt a little bit spurned, if one
he didn't.
presumes, but it was Zeffirelli who ended up becoming somewhat of a problem in that troubled production because he had his sights on something more Aida-like instead of the more intimate chamber Shakespearean drama that the material required. But he wrote Vanessa. He wrote the libretto to Vanessa, for sure.
And more modern, it would be John Coriano and Marc.
Sure, yeah.
That?
Yeah, that's true. You're right.
It's very similar.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, same type of influences.
I think they were lucky.
Yeah. Menotti had a different style, didn't he? Did you ever meet Menotti?
Yes, I met him. He was very
personality.
Very chaotic. So
Oh, really? What do you mean by chaotic?
I met him when I was composer resident at the New York Philharmonic.
Oh.
He wrote a piece that was sort of like not playable. It was strangely, it was all irrational, and so we didn't know what to do. We wanted to do the piece, so we went to. He said, "Don't give it to someone to convert." And so he did the people who convert pieces into playable things from sketches and whatever this was, and so we played it. But I didn't get a sense of him as as a together person. This was also late in his life.
Oh yeah. Well, in the vaguest terms, you could say he was sort of a showman, and Barber was sort of more pure music. Even though Barber has his 2 operas, but Barber was literary. Menotti was a showman, and did more Broadway. In fact, these were the days when operas even were being shown on Broadway.
I know, it's amazing that could be. That all those operas, we call them, see them, were done on Broadway. How could that be? It's that's perhaps the top of the mark where music was more important than a lot of things.
Sure. Yeah, in fact, do you remember Fran Lebowitz walked up to introduce the screening of the new Bernstein documentary last week, and it was just such a howling laugh, the hardest I've laughed in months, because she testified to the fact that growing up, she used to watch on television Bernstein's young people's concerts, and she was blown away, sort of in awe. So this is probably what a great conductor is. It fit every archetype. And she says, but it doesn't happen anymore. So she says these aren't paid kids. She found out later that these were not actors. They actually loved this music. They were kind of raptly attending these young people's concerts. She said that doesn't exist anymore. How did we lose that? And she was also saying, parents if you have kids, make them watch this. And if they refuse, get rid of them. Do you share that sort of sense of loss that for young people aren't raptly coming to concerts?
Yes, I do.
You just said things were on Broadway, right? That's the place. So it's weird. I wonder who's responsible for this problem, because maybe there should be more of this type of things on these mainstream venues like Broadway. Did you ever test those boundaries yourself? Try to bring things out of the concert hall into other venues that
Yeah, I remember movies. I never did them all, but I offered a couple of movies to do it.
I see.
I was afraid.
Yeah.
I was afraid.
Yeah.
Where it would take me.
Yeah. Your music, what we know is that your music will continue to be played. And Marc, any comments sort of as we wrap up about I hate to say it this way, but you are the next generation in a certain sense. You've taken a certain sense of responsibility for promoting and sharing David's music by playing it, studying it, and so on, recording it. So what is the future for David's music?
Well, it's like we've been talking about Samuel Barber. It's the same thing. As David was talking about, Barber's incredible gifts with like fugue and form and all that. That's not just in a music theory class. That is architecture that lives on. And the only reason that I've been committed and perhaps an advocate, whatever labels, whatever, it's just gotten in my bones. It's made a difference to me, I do like the idea of being part of this next generation and letting people know about this great music. I'm very interested in, for instance, young students who are studying music. When it comes to modern music, it's always some of the experimental composers who I like very much, like Henry Cowell and some of those, and there are obviously more. But what about the composers who are writing pieces that are lyric and that are formal and romantic? I think that's a whole wonderful subject, and everyone can live together. It doesn't have to be pick one or the other, or mix them up, combine them up. But anyway, my advocacy, my commitment has been through the music. I mean, I love David; he's my dear friend. But the music itself speaks for itself,
And it does seem, David, you're so blessed to have a publisher who's published all of your music, and it just sounds like a great relationship, and your place in history is permanent and irrefutable.
That's so strange.
It's there. It's there, and I love your music so much.
Thank you very much.
It was such a pleasure talking to you.
It is a pleasure for me too, and to meet you.